enjoy this man's work on the Today Show on MSNBC as well. I listened to him in the car. And his new book, Pops, Learning to Be a Son and a Father, is perfect right now, certainly on Father's Day weekend and Father's Day week, wherever books are sold. Craig Melvin here on the Rich Eisen Show. How you been, Craig?
Rich, so good to come on. So good to be a part of this Peacock synergy.
Yes, indeed.
During Father's Day week, I have been a fan of your work for many years as well. So good to finally talk to you.
Exactly, and it was a pleasure being able to tell that to you in person when I ran into you at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. What's your team, Craig? What's your sports teams? Who do you root for?
So in 1988, back when the NFL teams used to travel for the preseason to cities that didn't have major teams, in 1988, the then Washington football team, they traveled to Williams-Brice Stadium. There was a guy under center named Doug Williams who looked like me, who my father adored. And after seeing the Redskins and the Bills in 1988, I became a Washington fan. And then fast forward to 2008, when I moved to Washington for work at the NBC station there, and I met my now wife covering. She was covering the Washington football team at the time. I met and fell in love with a sports anchor, and the first story I saw her covering was a Washington football story. I knew it was meant to be then. And we've been Washington football fans ever since, Rich.
Yeah, I know, and you and I are similar like that. I met my wife in ESPN newsroom, and fell in love with her, and watched her with a terrific career in television sports as well. And Lindsay Zarniak is your wife, correct, Craig?
At last check, that was correct.
Correct, great. Good to know. That has confirmed. Check mark. Terrific. And so you're both
small children.
Yeah. How many kids do you have? Okay.
Two. We have a 7-year-old and we have a 4-year-old. My 7-year-old just went to soccer. My 4-year-old is when we're done here, I'll take her to swimming. We pretty much run a shuttle service for little people. Kind of what we do. We used to have free time and watch movies and drink wine, and now we drive around ingrates.
Well, was that the original title of your book, Craig? Driving Around Ingrates? Is that?
You know what? That was actually my pitch, and the publisher came back and they were like, I don't know if people are going to buy that.
I call them narcissists in my house, Craig. Susie and I call them narcissists every now and then.
How old are yours?
12, 10, and 7. So my youngest is your oldest.
Smokes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Holy smokes.
But it is the greatest thing. I mean, it is the greatest thing. And, and one thing that, my wife and I talk about and sometimes do tell certainly our oldest is that there's no handbook pretty much on learning to parent. We all can obviously take from the roots of our tree best we can, but when it all comes down to it in real life, in real time, you're kind of sometimes fumbling for the light switch. And, I think that's what your book in part is about, Craig.
It is. We are all learning on the fly, and I would contend, Rich, that each generation does a little bit better than the previous. My dad, and I write about it in the book. In fact, the first line of the book is, my dad was born in a prison in West Virginia in 1950. And it's not something that I knew growing up, but it's certainly not something that we talked about. And the ways that can shape and mold you, you don't fully appreciate until you're much older. So my dad was a jail baby, as the kids called him when he was little. He didn't know who his father was until he was almost a teenager. And in the book, I interviewed my dad for more than 4 hours. And one of the questions that I asked was, what's the most money you ever wasted? And without missing a beat, my dad said, about $2,400 in 1986. $2,400 in 19. What was that on? He's like, that's what it cost to put my father in the ground. He did not know his dad, and when he did finally sort of get to know him later in life, he didn't like him very much, and so they didn't have much of a relationship. So then fast forward to my dad becomes a father. He doesn't have a great playbook, Rich.
Right.
And so he did the best that he could. I did not fully appreciate that he was doing the best that he could until I sat down to write this book. My father suffered with a couple different addictions, and but consequently wasn't the best dad growing up. And then all of a sudden, in the third quarter of his life, if you will, late 60s, he decides to finally pick himself up, dust himself off, and chart a new path. And it's a remarkable story. It just happens to be, my dad's story. And so I wrote this book to try and do some good.
Craig Melvin of the Today Show and Pops, learning to be a son and a father here on the Rich Eisen Show. So for those who are hearing this story for the first time, and those who might have a similar story to tell, how do you parent? How did you figure out how to parent? Did you utilize some of the things that you didn't like about what happened to you as a kid and said, I'm going to steadfastly avoid this? Or how did you grab the handbook and playbook?
There was a little bit of that. I've always believed that you can be motivated by negative examples more than positive examples in many instances, and that was the case. The picture of a father that I saw, I didn't know, precisely the kind of man I wanted to be or what I wanted to do with my life, but I know that, for the better part of 20 years, the father that I saw, I didn't want to be that. And that did motivate me. But more than that, I had a lot of men and women, by the way, along my journey who stepped in to fill those voids. Uncles and teachers and coaches, and my mom. My mother, God bless her, and I write a fair amount about her in the book as well. My mother, like a lot of mothers out there in this country, unfortunately, had to play the part of mom and dad for a good chunk of my life. And she did it without complaint. And when you're young, you don't realize what's happening around you. And when I sat down to work on this book, I interviewed my mother as well for hours. Which both of the interviews, my mom and my dad, when people ask now, what's your favorite interview? That's always a big question. Hands down, 1 and 2, mom and dad in that order. But my mother had picked up a second job at one point because, my dad's drinking addiction, his addiction to alcohol, soon gave way to another addiction, an addiction to gambling, video poker. In South Carolina in the 80s and 90s was all the rage, and it became quite the scourge on many families. It was finally outlawed. But for a number of years, you could go and sit in front of a screen and feed, dollar after dollar into this video poker machines. My dad would, every other Friday he'd get his paycheck. He'd belly up to the video poker machine. He'd have a tall boy Budweiser in one hand, and he's pressing the buttons in the other. And my mom would send me and eventually my younger brother we'd go in there in the afternoon and we'd try to negotiate some of my dad's paycheck before he squandered all of it. And so during that time, my mother really put our family on her back and supported us financially, emotionally, spiritually, and it's not something that 13 or 14-year-olds can fully appreciate. And then all of a sudden, as you know, Rich, you start to have your own children, and you view parenthood differently. And I became more aware of the sacrifices that both of my parents were making when I started to parent my own too.
Well, Craig, congrats on the book, man. Pops, learning to be a son and a father. Your beautiful family on the cover as well. I wasn't able to read it from cover to cover. Is there something in there about crying at everything now that you're a father? Is there something, commercials?
You know what? Actually, there is. There is something in the book about how being a dad turns you into a big pile of mush.
I know. I cried insurance commercials. I don't know I sometimes think of what the hell's happening to me.
We're more tender than we used to be. I would argue it's a good thing.
Of course, absolutely.
Rich, I am so glad, and I know it's been years. I'm so glad you left ESPN. This is what a blessing this has been for all of us at the Peacock.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that, Craig. I appreciate that. Kick that up the chain of command. Go for it.
I will. And it's a good thing you got out before the place went to hell.
Craig, that'll be for our next book together.
Is this live? This isn't live.
This thing on it. Yeah, it's like, by the way, I feel like I'm Shannon Sharp. I should tell you that you're on the air. This has been live the whole time. You take care of yourself, Craig. Congrats on the book. Let's do this again.
Be well.
You got it. That's Craig Melvin, at Craig Melvin. I follow him on Twitter. You should as well. On Instagram, at Craig Melvin NBC. That one took a turn at the very end.
Well, Craig's got someone in his house who knows what you've been through, Rich.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Mutually parted ways. Oh, it's kind of, I'm so naive sometimes. I don't connect the dots.
Yeah.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.